Welcome back, friends, to another amazing episode of the Catalyzing Podcast. So excited to have a really just impactful guest today, someone who I've found his podcast to look inside of leadership recently, and I've just been amazed by the stories that he tells and how he uses those stories to teach really impactful lessons. Tom Henschel, thank you so much for taking some time to join us today on the Catalyzing Podcast.
I am so glad to be here. Thanks, Ryan.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. And, Tom, you are the president and the leadership coach for Essential Communications. You've got the Look and Sound of Leadership podcast, and both really powerful tools for leaders out there in all scopes of business and work. And, what I love is how you call your podcast an ongoing series of executive coaching tips to help you be perceived the way you want to perceive, because that's a big part of this. We're not always perceived what we put out, and we're not always aware of that, nor are others aware of that. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about the look and sound of healthcare leadership. So thanks for diving into this with me today.
I love talking about this, so thanks.
Awesome. Before we get into the good stuff, something good in the beginning. All right, you have a background as an actor. Tell us about your story of your transition from being an actor to becoming an executive coach.
Huh. Okay. So I was mostly a television and theater actor here in Hollywood. So I made my living. I put my kids in private school. I bought a house. I mean, I did okay. I wasn't, a star, but I made a living as an actor. And what I could see was that my career was not going to sustain me when I got to be 50 and 60. And so I had to have another plan. I just had to. And I assumed I was going to teach because I've always taught. I taught when I was in high school. I taught junior high school. That's the weirdest thing. That's so weird. But I did. And in college, I used to teach. And then out here in Hollywood, I would teach. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go teach. And I taught for 2 semesters in a college. And oh my gosh, Ryan, I was so unhappy. It was horrible. And I was depressed because I thought, well, I don't want to teach high school. Like, how would I ever teach an adult? I didn't know there was a thing called corporate training or corporate learning. I didn't know that. But then I found out, and I ended up being a presentation skills trainer, right? Makes perfect sense.
Wow.
Going from being
Yes.
an actor to teaching presentation skills. That was an easy jump. And almost immediately I got asked to work one-on-one with senior leaders. It wasn't even called coaching in those days.
Okay.
So that was my transition. I was really lucky to find people who mentored me and taught me lots.
That's exciting. And just curious, during any of your roles on television or in shows, did you ever play a healthcare professional or anything in that realm?
Oh, yes. I did. The two that I remember that were just so much fun. One was on the Golden Girls. I was in an elevator with them, and it was so much fun. It was just the greatest time. And the other was on Murder, She Wrote. I had a scene with Angela Lansbury,
Oh,
which was
wow.
just, for me, having grown up in the
Yeah,
professional theater, she was like a goddess to me. And I mean, it was great to work with her and great to be with her. So
that is
yeah,
so awesome. That's so
it
cool.
was fun.
My favorite all-time healthcare personality on television is Hugh Laurie as House. I watched that start to finish, and I'm just amazed by his character and the stories. And then the fact that he's just such a brilliant actor. You
Yeah.
would never know he has that accent on that show. It's just
Well, and a
absolutely
comedy
amazing.
background, he's known
Yes.
as a comedian. Like,
Mhm.
really? You would just never know it. It's great.
I know,
Yeah.
it's awesome. I love it. Well, I love that background. All through like a lot of the leadership training and whatnot, Dale Carnegie, we've actually done acting and improv drills as part of leadership coaching and leadership, team dynamics training. So having a background in acting when it comes to being a public speaker and doing, connecting with people, it's so great. And that really comes through on your podcast when you tell the stories and share the stories of just lessons that are learned and the experiences of clients and whatnot. And a big part of what you talk about is the concept of self-awareness, self-management. And I'm really intrigued by your thoughts on this. How do you claim to describe self-awareness, and how is that different from self-management?
Wow. Okay. So you can imagine, Ryan, that as an executive coach, when I'm coming to a leader and we're trying to create some change, whatever that professional growth is going to be,
Mhm.
talking about self-awareness and self-management becomes critical, right?
Mhm.
So I've been talking about this with people for a long time. And it's fascinating because everybody experiences it differently in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about self-awareness, I think there are two parts to it. And there may be more, but I think there are two parts to it. One of which is, what am I thinking? Like, am I aware of my thinking? Am I aware of the stories that I'm telling? Am I aware of whether I'm assuming good intent with you? Like, am I aware of how I'm treating you and the choices I've made about you?
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is self-awareness around feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I've left out the third, which is somatic, which is what's happening in my body.
Right.
Right. That suddenly, when you and I are having this conversation, I'm like super short of breath. This is stressing me out. Right.
Yeah.
I may not even be aware of that until, like, my friend goes like, wow, I saw you talking to Ryan. You looked really stressed out. And I go, I did. Yeah. She looked like you were panting. And I was like, right. Like, I had no awareness of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem. If I have no awareness and I'm going to lead people,
Mm-hmm.
this is a
Yes.
problem. Right. So working on self-awareness is one thing, but that is kind of the building block that leads to the self-management piece.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing you talked about. I think in general in our lives, we, something happens in the world, whatever. It doesn't need to happen to us like a victim, but something happens in the world and we have a reaction, one of those things, a thought, a feeling, or something in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And then I act on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the cycle, right? There's input or stimulus, I have a reaction, and then I have an action. What's completely missing in there is choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's self-management. So something happens to me, you raise your voice at me. Can I insert choice in here somewhere? Right? So maybe I'm going to have the reaction before I can manage my choice, but
Mm-hmm.
right? So the action happens, I have a reaction, and now I insert choice. I don't have to act right away. Many leaders, that's hard for them, especially under stress with big things or in certain situations or with certain people or certain topics where they get triggered and their
Mm-hmm.
ability to self-manage goes down.
And that a big part of that is the ability to be self-aware of your own feelings and your own history of reacting to stimulus, because you have a more difficult time self-managing if you're not even aware enough to know that you respond or react in a certain way. And one of the things I love that you talked about, I forget when it was, but one of your old episodes, you talked about the ladder and about having fact finding, and then being able to before you make that decision, what facts are there, and then you have to gain some decisions based on those facts before you actually make that action. And that comes to self-awareness of yourself and your environment, but also that self-management before you just verbal diarrhea.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. The ladder of inference that you
Yes.
referred
Yes.
to
Ladder of
is
inference.
exactly that. It's exactly that. It's a tool to help you make a choice that's really informed before you take an action.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it slows things down, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you're actually going to think about your thinking,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just like shoot from the hip. So yeah, that's one of many tools. And there are lots of tools out there for leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you want to work on the self-awareness part or you want to work on the self-management part, there's lots of tools out there. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so
And
other
especially
tools.
it's
Yeah.
important not just for the leaders but also team members, because we've talked about this in our last conversation over the call, where it's not just one directional. It's not just leaders doing things to make it a great team environment. It's not just team members doing things. It's got to be two directional. So both the leaders and the team members have to own that self-management. They have to own that self-awareness. So like, let's look at it from the perspective of the leaders first. In what ways can owning like your self-management help to make it a better environment for your team members because you're good at that?
Oh, so here's one of the ways that I think about that. I love the question, by the way. I think leaders in an organization are like Tom Cruise in our popular culture, that when the leader speaks, it always goes beyond whoever the leader is speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
The leader is a celebrity. The leader is noticed. The leader is, actions are noticed. Decisions get noticed. How the leader treats others gets noticed. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that leader is truly on a corporate stage and
Right.
people are watching. So I think self-awareness becomes incredibly important. This idea about, am I being perceived the way I want to be perceived? Like,
Mhm.
if all these people are taking in data from me, I hope they're getting the message I want. And here's, as a coach, what I say is, and I hope you're crafting a conscious message. I hope you're not just kind of drifting through your world and not paying attention to the fact that things are happening in your wake,
Mhm.
because you're a leader. It has
Mhm.
to be,
Mhm.
whether you want that or not.
Absolutely. And when you're a team member on the other side of it too, it's equally as important, because not only is it important for the leader to be aware of that message that they're crafting, and also the way they are reacting and responding to stimulus or to situations that pop up, fires that occur, but team members as well. That, I think, that shows, even if you're not in a leadership role and title, you can showcase leadership by the way you carry yourself, by the way you own your own business within that team. You own your own role within that by managing yourself well. When you manage yourself well and you're self-aware, you're less likely for others to be reactive around you, be volatile around you, or to put up defensiveness walls. I think when you're coming from that perspective, it's equally as important for the leader to not feel those coming from the team members. Because think about this: if you're a leader, Tom, and you have team members who are always on the defensive, always reacting to things, first and foremost, is it me as a leader that's creating that in them? But then it also could be maybe they need to self-manage a little more effectively, which is then creating a more difficult time for me as a leader to work with them, because they're always reacting and not self-managing.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. You know, something I don't know. Do you imagine that the people who listen to your show are working in places that are fairly public, where there are other people
Yes,
around? Yeah, I
absolutely.
do too.
Absolutely. Often, whether it be healthcare professionals, fitness, wellness professionals, the listeners of this show are most likely human service professionals. They're providing a service that is geared toward taking care of someone else, not
Which,
necessarily products, but
which means they are around other people.
yes, very much so.
Yeah. So this whole
Yes.
idea of self-awareness, I think, becomes so critical, because look, the truth is someone's always watching you,
Hmm.
or you
Yeah.
have to assume that.
Hmm.
You would be better off if you did assume that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Someone's always watching you. So are you showing up the way you want to show
Hmm.
up?
How do I look from the balcony?
Yeah,
Others. Yes, very much
right.
so. Well, then what about in that case where you have, let's say you're a leader or just a team member, and you have someone that you just recognize doesn't self-manage well? Um,
Oh,
or they just have like a skewed sense of self-awareness. What is your advice for approaching that person, working with them collaboratively, helping them without getting their defense mechanisms put up?
oh man. Okay. Here's,
Loaded
wow.
question.
Well, it's just complex, right? It's
Yeah.
really complex, because one of the things I think you don't want to do is to sound as though you're the person's boss.
Hmm.
You're not trying to tell them what to do, right? Because
Yeah.
that's not actually your role, the way you describe it,
Hmm.
right? It's just a conversation with a coworker where it's like, this is not going well.
Right.
Or every time this thing happens, I see you flip out and that makes me whatever, right? I mean,
Hmm.
there's some dynamic that's going on and I want to give you some feedback, but I'm not your boss. So
Hmm.
that's number one. Number two is, I think, and I listen, I think this is hard for people. I think this is hard for people in the world in general. Speak for yourself.
Hmm.
Don't speak for others. Don't speak what you think they're thinking. Speak for yourself. So it might sound something like, um, hey, Ryan, I've really noticed that when this one thing happens, you tend to get really accelerated. I notice your speech rate goes up. I notice that you kind of have trouble keeping eye contact with me. And I just want to tell you, it's causing me to worry about our outcome of that procedure.
Hmm.
I wonder, I just want you to know I'm concerned about it. And I stopped talking.
Hmm.
That's it. I spoke for myself. I tried to describe what I saw. I didn't try to get in your head. I didn't say, and everybody else is worried about it too.
Hmm.
I mean, Dr. Martin is really concerned about it. Like, it's like not my business to tell, right? I'm
Hmm.
going to speak for myself. This is really hard to do. It's really hard to do.
Very much
And
so.
by the way, I don't even know what that sounds like. Does that sound, maybe it sounds completely
No,
inflammatory.
it sounds, no, to me, that came across as you were, you were painting observations from your own perspective and how it impacts you. You were not casting judgment on me. You were not labeling me, which I think is really crucial. That you, when you provide feedback to that to someone else, you don't want to be labeling them. You don't want to cast judgment on them. Now, of course, they may take it as judgment, and and if they're
Right, right, right.
lacking that ability to process that feedback without feeling judged, or who knows what their history, their triggers are. They might have had a rough upbringing, or they might have been in situations where previous employers was nothing but negativity and just beating them down or chastising them with everything. So of course, anything you try to say will come across as that at first, but the way you put it, as long as you do that consistently as a leader and a team member, then it starts to break that barrier down, I feel, because then it's consistent with the message. And you constantly are reinforcing the fact, this is how I feel, this is what I'm perceiving, I'm concerned about this outcome. So I think that was really powerful.
I want to go back to something you said right at the
Yeah.
beginning about not being judged.
Yeah.
I think one of the things between teammates is whether or not you assume good intent.
Mm-hmm.
Do I assume this person is doing their best? As opposed to, do I think this person is a freaking incompetent idiot and shouldn't be working here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, really, am I assuming good intent? And that makes a huge difference, and allows me to speak
Mm-hmm.
for myself without judgment. My hope is without judgment. Right?
Mm-hmm. And hopefully the way you carry yourself and the way you present yourself to your team, if you are always assuming the best in others, that should come across in your presence and your personality. Should be, there's a feeling of optimism in the environment. I think that should hopefully show through if you're always truly showcasing that you see the best in others. You're advocating for them. You're going to bat for them when they need support.
Well said.
Very crucial. A big part of that is listening, isn't it? Being able to listen and shut this and pick up on others. Why does leadership sound a lot like listening?
Well, it doesn't have to. There are plenty of leaders who talk a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, look, I think it's the story of go last, right? I mean, that if you're going to walk in a room with 10 of your subordinates and you say, here's what I think we ought to do, what do you all think? You're never going to hear anybody's idea. You're just not.
Mm-hmm.
But if you walk in the room and go, this is the problem we're trying to solve, where are you all on this? And you go last, you will probably hear some ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to go last. I think leaders have a lot of pressure. I think leaders want to share what they know. I get it. It's hard to go last.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the other thing. Man, I could talk about this forever because it's been my own journey as a coach. It is not only about being silent. It is certainly partly about being silent.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had to learn that it's like not my turn to speak. Just stop the impulse to speak. But then actually to listen to what's being said and not think about whatever might come into my mind, because, oh my Lord,
Mm-hmm.
our brains are just so hyperactive, right? It's so hard to just be quiet and listen to the other person. And oh man, that's hard. So yes, it sounds like listening. I just want to say this about it, which is the leaders who do it and the managers who do it get extremely different results from their people, because their people are invested in their work in a different way, because they are being heard about their work. It's just different.
That's a big part of listening. You said it's not just about being silent. It's about being engaged in the conversation. It's about your body language and gestures. It's about matching and mirroring with certain keywords, or just things that you can do to reflect back to them so they know and get that you truly are listening, versus just a blank stare and just saying nothing with no movements. You might not be responding, but that doesn't necessarily affirm to them that you're getting what they're saying. And it's also really important to reflect back their key points so they know, hey, you know what, Tom he was listening to me. He did get what I was feeling, reflecting back feelings you might observe or feelings they've expressed, not assuming judging feelings, but just if they express a feeling, if they mention certain keywords over and over, those are important to them. So that's really a key effective behavior of a good listener, is that they're not just listening, but they're also reflecting back through their nonverbals and the verbals.
When I started intentionally working on my listening skills, which was a long time ago, but I started reading about it. Like, what do good listeners actually do? That there's an exercise called parroting. And the idea of literally that you have to listen, and when you hear the end of a paragraph, instead of you saying whatever you would say next, you parrot back like the last 6 words or something. I mean, I don't remember if that's exactly the exercise, but that's kind of the exercise.
Yeah.
And how hard it is. And it was like, woo, it was just, I mean, yeah, just learning to listen is so hard. And you can do it, by the way.
Absolutely.
I just want to say, I learned. I've changed, my listening has changed profoundly over the years and continues to.
It's still a journey for me too. It's something that I know I need to continue to get better at. You know, I very much believe so. They would think it's Stephen R. Covey, listening with the intent to understand versus listening with the intent to reply. That's something that's so crucial, and that's always a constant, just like you. It's journey for me as a father, as a partner, as a friend, as a leader, and everything. It's easy to judge and easy to want to jump in with your insights, but it's not always good to do that.
Yeah. There's a little triangle that I have talking about listening that's been really helpful for me because it's pretty easy, which is that most of us listen to fix or listen to win, but it's very difficult to listen to learn. Most of us do not come that way. Children do, but most of us as adults do not.
I love that.
I do too. And because, by the way, it's also really easy when I hear you tell me a story and I go, hey, have you called so-and-so, or you know who I could introduce you to? Listen, by the way, that's helpful, but it's clearly listening to fix, right? Or, you know, you talk about, I don't know, the movie you saw, and I go, no, are you kidding? Like, oh my God, I'm listening to win. And those are, by the way, they're not inappropriate, but listening to learn is a choice that's hard for most of us as adults.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times too, at least just feedback that I've gotten from when I've chimed in when I shouldn't have or whatnot in the past, you know, listening to fix is acceptable if they ask you to fix. You know, if they're like, if they're truly asking you for, what do you think I should do? But then I also think it's important for good leaders and coaches to not just simply say, you should do this. They should ask more clarifying questions, because when that person will believe that their action is their own decision, they're going to buy into it more versus just doing what Ryan told them to do.
Good for you, man. I am so with you.
Absolutely. There's also a lot of barriers in those cases when it comes to communication. What are just some of the big barriers that we run into as team members when it comes to being effective communicators?
Wow. Well, it's funny. One certainly is listening. I'm not kidding. I mean, but I think in a business that is as busy as I imagine yours is, where people are pretty active all the time, there's always more work to do, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the barriers is balancing tasks and relationships. And I don't mean relationships like I have to be your best friend, but I mean actually like, do we have time to talk about our work so we can do better tomorrow than we're doing today, right? So I think it's hard. I think one of the barriers to communication is how busy we all are. And then you add in, and I'm not kidding about this, and then you add in the fact that we're all connected all the time. So if I get 2 minutes to be down and really unplug, I don't unplug. I go look at my friend's Instagram, right? Or I answer 2 emails on my phone with my mom, right? Like whatever. It's like We don't unplug. We don't
Yeah.
rest our brains.
Yeah.
So I think another barrier is just like, well, people are tired because they're
Mhm.
working hard.
It's easy. We are very busy, very much. And so in the realm of healthcare, wellness, people, professions, you're always finding more stuff to do. And you're absolutely right. We're not disconnecting. That's why you got burnout, compassion, fatigue. You have situations where there are workplaces that people are just on edge at all times, or they're understaffed. There's just challenges creating a bigger workload for them. And one thing you also mentioned in multiple episodes where you've talked about the importance of psychological safety. And I
Mm,
think that comes, you mentioned it's not just about the tasks, it's about the relationships and managing that.
yeah.
Tell us about that, because how can team members and leaders create that environment where relationships are the focus, so there is a psychological safety which promotes someone giving more feedback, feeling more comfortable being themselves authentically. Tell us about your perspective on that psychological safety component of team dynamics.
Wow. So psychological safety happens when people trust that they will
Mm-hmm.
not get punished for not being perfect. And so, and there's so many studies about this, especially, by the way, around the healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
Studies, Amy Edmondson at Harvard University is the one who started this whole school of thinking about psychological safety. And she studied people in hospitals who were and were not willing to admit they had made mistakes. And when people are not willing to make mistakes for whatever reason, there's some psychological safety that is missing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for leaders need to create a culture of learning where mistakes happen. And what do we do about them? We don't punish people, right? How can we as a group get better because, Jerry missed that this morning. She just missed it. Like, how can we help solve that problem? It's not about Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's going to be safe for Jerry to come back the next time, right? And say, oh, whatever. So I don't know if that even sounds realistic.
I think it does. I think it's important. We're human. We err, we flaw, we make mistakes. And I think the key is that you have an environment where people can be built back up after that. They can learn from those mistakes. Of course, it's important for everyone to be aware of their impact and their influence in those mistakes and reflect upon why they made those choices. But when you have a team that, like you said, that embraces the importance of learning, and you learn from your mistakes, well, you could also look at it as, okay, there was a breakdown there. What was my role in that? How could I be better next time? Maybe it wasn't just Tom's problem. It was I could have done better. That would have not set the environment up for Tom to make that mistake.
Listen, it also, by the
Yeah.
way, when I think about it with leaders do it with a snort
Mm-hmm.
or an eye roll,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, leaders can be completely nonverbal, but they create unsafe environments, right? I say this out
Mm-hmm.
loud, and the leader goes
Mm-hmm.
and rolls her eyes. It's
Yep.
like, and she doesn't say anything, right? I mean, there's kind of nothing to quote document,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not psychologically safe. So psychological safety can happen in all kinds of ways.
Yes.
And I
Absolutely.
think, by the way, it goes back to something I said before about assuming good intent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's so powerful. If you assume good intent, you assume the best in people, it makes a world of difference in the feeling. And hopefully you won't have those eye rolls, those gestures that just come out. That's also awareness. Having someone on your team that you trust to call you out. Hey, did you know, Ryan, that you always do this when this person brings up ideas? And being
Ooh,
open to that feedback. That's
well,
very crucial.
well, and if it's given with good intent,
Yes.
maybe you can. I mean, listen, again, I think there are certain cultures that I've been in, and I say cultures as in teams that I've been in, where they have learned to give each other feedback, and they're good at it, and kind, and accurate, and timely. it's become a practice for them, but
Mhm.
it's the rare team. Most teams do not give each other feedback. And
Yes.
in most teams, even the leader is not giving great feedback
Mhm.
downwards into the team.
Mhm.
Um, it's feedback's hard.
Mhm.
Feedback is really
Yeah.
hard. So, but again, that's a way that psychological safety can be exhibited and
Mhm.
created. If my feedback is fair and my feedback is done with kindness and with the intent to help you grow and get better,
Mhm.
I think that again creates psychological safety. So as leaders, man, I think we get to turn that dial a lot.
Mhm. And if it's always constructive feedback and there's no affirmations and there's no um, different tone to it, it's easy to shut down with that feedback. And Tom, in all your podcast episodes, you always give those affirmations. So we're going to do it right now. And I just want to say thank you, Tom Henschel, for not just being a part of this conversation and bringing great perspective into it, but also you have so many great resources on your essentialcomms.com website. It's essential, COMMS
No, no,
.com.
no.
Oh, no. Oh, sorry. My
COMM.com.
apologies. My mistake. COMM.com,
Yeah.
essentialcom.com. And you have a lot of great resources on there. You also have a YouTube channel for your look and sound of leadership. And then your podcast can be found across all platforms as well, too. So thank you for putting that energy and those tips and those conversations out into the world. I really appreciate that.
And I'm so glad you do. Listen, Ryan, I want to be clear about what people can have if they come to the website, which is we have a whole library full of just infographics about
Mm-hmm.
communications, things
Mm-hmm.
like self-awareness, self-management, all kinds of tools that are there for people. So please come help yourself.
Absolutely. And it's www.essentialcomm.com.
It is. And it's
Got to correct that.
right. It's
Yes,
the tools bin. Yeah. Great.
absolutely. So what is one final call to action, Tom, that you have for leaders listening to this, either current leaders in a role where they supervise or future budding leaders that have aspirations of growing? What is one thing they could take action on today? Just one little thing they could do maybe that takes them a good step forward in that direction.
I would say start a habit of reflection. I mean, it could be as simple at night while you're brushing your teeth, what do I want to do differently tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
That's just a piece of reflection. I think you can't be a really impactful leader without the ability to reflect.
Very powerful. And it's something that we all have the ability to do. It costs nothing other than dropping your ego and being open to it. So thank you for that. Tom Henschel, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. Really great conversation. And I hope that all the listeners not only check out your resources, but just, if nothing else, I never want to be a waste of time for my listeners. And I think there's a lot of great things that make you think coming out of this episode and reflect. And that's our job is done if that's the case, if it gets people reflecting and thinking. So, Tom, thank you so much for being on the Catalyzing podcast. I wish you nothing but the best in all that you do. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Awesome. Have a great day.